Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Danvers Historical Society. We hope you enjoyed today's virtual speaker series. Please be sure to visit our website, www.danvershistory.org, to find out details about our upcoming virtual events and programs. We truly appreciate everyone's support, help, and teamwork in making these virtual events possible. We want to thank our speakers, DCAT, our volunteers, members, and trustees. We hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here to the Danvers Historical Society's Captive Memorial Hall. I'm Dave McKenna, the current president of the society, and we've got a great talk for you this evening. And I see we've got a lot of interested people. I think this is the biggest crowd we've had, maybe with the exception of the State Hospital talk, but I think this might be even bigger. But we have a great wealth of information tonight. And Sheila Cook-Hazer, former employee arranger, I guess, for the National Park Service, and done a lot of great research. They volunteer here at the Society. And without further ado, I'm going to let her come up and start her presentation. And I think we're all going to learn a lot tonight, and I think we'll enjoy it very much. Sheila, thank you.
Well, I didn't expect this many. But just to ask the audience, how many of you wore Ideal baby shoes? How many of you had them or bought them for your children or grandchildren? Okay. A few of you. And how many of you knew someone that worked at Ideal Baby Shoe Company? Great. We would like those who knew someone that worked at Ideal Baby Shoe Company. We do have a paper here to get their names and information. If you know, you can also email the Danvers Historical Society, give us that information. It'd be great to start researching some of the people who once worked for Ideal as well. So I started wondering about the Ideal Baby Shoe Company, and then when I discovered that it was started by a woman, that piqued my interest because I love women's history. And so I started to research her, and with the help of other individuals, whom I'd like to thank right now, like Tina Bianco. She's one of our volunteers, and she's really good on Ancestry.com, so she found out a lot of information for me. And then I'd like to thank Joyce Cranford and Karen Wagner, who are our volunteers and members. They helped with the exhibit that we have up, and we have practically over 500 Ideal baby shoes in our collection. So we really don't need more. I know you might have one, but Laura insists that we still take them. What we'd like to do now is kind of research what we have and what we don't have of the shoes. And I'd also like to thank the Danvers archivist, Richard Trask, and his assistant, Julie Silk, because they helped me find a lot of information they have in the Danvers archives, which helped with a lot of the research. As well as we were able to connect with two family members of Andrew Miller Day. Her great-great-grandnieces, Hope Miller and Joy Miller, sent me a lot of information about the family, so that helped quite a bit too. So, how did this all begin? Let's go back in time to the 19th century. And Danvers was a shoemaking industry here in the 19th century. So in the early 1800s, the farmers in Danvers during the winter months, their families would make shoes for extra income. So there were records of what were called the shoe bosses, the men they would work for. And I found a record for one individual, Nancy Putnam. Of course, it had to be a Putnam. Nancy Putnam in 1838 worked for John and Samuel Preston, and she stitched the upper parts of the shoe, the upper parts of the shoes, and those were done by the young women in the family, and then the men in the family would make cut out the soles of the shoes and then put it all together. So this was a family industry, and that's where the 10-footers would start to be built on people's properties in the backyard where they would keep the shoemaking equipment. So here we have like a bunch of guys making the shoes here, and a photograph of a shoemaker's bench like the one we have over in the corner there as well. So you had these families doing that as extra income, and Harriet Tapley, who's a well-known historian, she wrote that within a half-mile radius of Danvers, on Putnamville, Locust Street, that was the shoe industry area, there was over $1 million in shoe industry and agricultural pursuits in the 1880s. So it was a way to make money as well. So you had these people, families, farmers, and their families making these shoes during the winter months. So in 1838, Nancy Putnam was paid $40.35 for making so many uppers of shoes. How many do you think she made for $40.35? 1,560 pairs over a 5-month period. That comes to about 2.5 cents per pair that she would do. How many of you would do that? I don't think I would do it, that's for sure. So her record helped give some information. The shoe bosses she worked for hired 300 people in the Danvers area to make shoes for them. These were the Brogan shoes. They were the work shoes. Hold up a sample here. Very crude. This is a Brogan shoe. And so the women were sewing all the upper parts, and then it would be attached to the sole, which was cut out by a harder leather by the men. And these were sent to the South. So who was wearing these? The enslaved people in the South. Yeah. So Danvers was making shoes for the enslaved population working in the South. So those were the shoes they were making at the time. So a few years later, in 1876, out in Western Mass, they were doing the same thing. Farmers out there, their families were making shoes during the winter months. So this was kind of a common practice all over Massachusetts. By the 1870s, there were about 3,000 women who were stitchers, that's what they were doing, were working in shoe factories all through Massachusetts. So in 1876, there was a baby girl born, Adra Miller, and she was the youngest of 5 children. Little would she know that she would become a very successful businesswoman and would own a business that would be worth $7 million when she died. So she grew up in a farm family, just like Nancy Putnam. She becomes a stitcher, making shoes. And she would work in the shoe factories in her hometown in Worthington, Mass, when she was a teenage girl. Now, in the 1890s, her whole family's working in the shoe, but they were farmers. 1890s, there was a depression in the United States, similar to the 1930 depression. And farmers lost a lot of their land. So Adra Miller, the Miller family, her father dies, and the family is desperate, so they have to sell the farm. So Adra Miller, her mother, who's a widow now, Dolly, her older sister, Mary, and her older brother, Herbert, and his wife, Susie, and as well, by this time, Adra has married Arthur Day. And they all moved from that western part of Massachusetts to Salem for jobs. And so her brother and her husband are working in the shoe factories cutting. They were cutters. They were cutting the soles of the shoes. And she was working as a stitcher along with her sister. So they're working in the shoe factories in Salem. And Audrey told a news reporter years later when they said, how'd you get started into this? She said she'd been working in shoe factories since she was 15 years old, and she knew every operation of the shoe manufacturing operation. So she and her family are living there in Salem on Essex Street. And then in 1900, they moved to Danvers. These shows some of the shoe factories with the women working. So they're working with the big, heavy sewing machines. So in 1900, Arthur Day buys for $1 the Doherty property, which is at 176 Locust Street. And some sources said they think he got it that cheap because he was related to that family, but I haven't been able to find that information, if he was related to the Dorothy family here in Danvers. So they moved to 176 Locust Street. This is what it looks like today. And in the backyard was this shed. And that's what Audrey calls it. She called it a shed. And I don't know who this guy is standing in front of the shed. And you do know, might know, let me know. Maybe that's her husband, Arthur Day. He's pretty tall, if it is. And so they moved here to Danvers, and Arthur still works in Salem. So what happens is in 1902, her brother Herbert, who's working at shoe factories in Salem, he brings home to Adra a couple of wooden lasts that are the baby shoes, for baby shoes. Now baby shoes being made at the time, so it would be like the wooden last like this. Look at it up close. That would be for a baby. They were not right and left foot feet. They were just one size. So you didn't have right and left for the babies. And the shoes they were making at that time were similar to this. And they were kind of a pain to put on your baby. Because you got all these buckles. So you can just imagine trying to put those shoes on, those little babies. So Audrey Day takes the shoe last and she decides that she's going to make different kinds of shoes. And she's going to make some that are very easy for people to put on their babies. So what she decides to do is take scraps of material and she makes like very simple, so you just have a little latch there to slip up. And then she makes moccasins so they could become easy to put it on and off the baby as well. So, typical, a woman who comes up with a good idea, and she said that she was making the ideal baby shoe. So she has an older brother, Herbert. What do older brothers like to do to their baby sisters? Make fun of them, right? So Herbert goes and he prints 100 business cards that say ideal baby shoe company. So Adra shows him off. She makes 9 pairs of shoes, probably similar to this pair. And she takes those business cards and she travels all over Essex County and she sells the shoes like that. And then she gets orders and more orders and more orders. And this is in 1902. So guess what? The whole family goes, oh, we'll help you make those shoes. So everybody gets into the act because she's bringing home probably more money than anybody else in the family at this time. Now the shoes are only being sold probably 50 cents. It's hard to know, but I know by 1920 they're selling for $2 or $2.50. $2 or $2.50 for a pair of ideal baby shoes. So she starts making these shoes, and they get more and more orders. So then she gets a hold of this friend of her named Alice Drew. Now we don't know if they worked in the same shoe factories in Salem, but Alice Drew, thanks to Tina researching her for me, we found out that Alice Drew grew up in New Hampshire. And she and her family, just like Audrey Day, they lost their farm. They moved to Salem to work in the shoe factories. So Alice Drew moves with her family to Salem. So they might have worked together in the same shoe factory. In 1906, we discovered that Alice Drew and Audrey Day are like partners owning the Ideal Baby Shoe Company. Never knew that before. So we find that Alice Drew is working there. She eventually moves here to Danvers and lives on 33 Park Street in Danvers. And she moves here with her mother, who is a widow by then, and her sister and 2 younger brothers. They all come to live here in Danvers. So she's like the vice president, and Adra is the president of the company. So they need more room. That little shoe shop's not working. So they rent. I haven't been able to find it. They buy it or they just rent it at the beginning. They eventually will own it, and that's 3 Holton Street before it was enlarged. So Adra and Alice have their company there, and they're starting to hire more women to work as their stitchers. In the meantime, her husband, Arthur Day, and her brother, Herbert Miller, decide they will start their own company where they'll make older children's shoes and adult shoes. And that's the H.A. Miller company here in Danvers. And so both these companies are operating out of 3 Holton Street at the time. So Adra Day, her talents are marketing and design. So she knows how to market and sell the shoes. Alice knows how to run the operations. So that is how they split up the work that they're going to do. And in 1910, Adra and Arthur buy 18 Holton Street. So if you know where this is, on the corner of Holton and Peabody Avenue, it's near Harriet Tapley's house. Didn't know Harriet Tapley's house is right near there. So 18 Holton Street, they move in there, and in the 1910 census it shows Adra, Arthur, her mother Dolly, her sister Mary, and now there's a nephew living with them, Jervis, and he's 10 years old. Adra and Arthur never had children, but this nephew is sent to live with her. So the other person who's living there is a boarder, and her name is Emma Little, and she's working for the Ideal Baby Shoe Company as a stitcher. We'll talk a little bit more about Emma later on. But so Audrey starts to travel a little beyond Massachusetts to sell her shoes. And in 1912, she goes to Baltimore, where they're having a big shoe convention. And she's selling her shoes, and she's there just like all the men that are there. And this news reporter comes up to her and talks to her about being a salesperson. And he calls her in the news article the knightness of the grip. Anyone ever heard the Knights of the Grip? Me neither. So I see this in the article and I go, what the heck is that? So I went online, of course, like you do now, and I found there's called Knights of the Grip, and this is like a metal tag that would be on their suitcases. They were a fraternal organization started in the 1880s for traveling salesmen. And they were started to kind of upgrade the social and moral image of salesmen, traveling salesmen. They also pooled their money together and would set up like a life insurance policies for their fellow traveling salesmen so that if they died, their family would have some money. So this reporter knew that all the salesmen at this shoe convention trying to sell to department stores that were becoming very popular then, JCPenney, Sears, are all at this convention to buy shoes, that she is just like the men there. She's the salesman. But then he also talks to her in a way, kind of probably downing her a little bit. Oh, you're just a sales rep. And she corrects him and says, no, I own the company. And then, this is the interesting thing, ladies. He calls her a suffragette. She immediately says, do not put down that I'm a suffragette. Now, why would she do that?
Because she wasn't.
It was a derogatory term. And she's in a world where she's working with men that own everything, and how's she going to sell to department stores if she lets them know that she might be a suffragette? So hard to know if she was for or against women getting the right to vote. But I thought that was very interesting to find that article about her. So she's very good at this. She's selling shoes all over the country. And then these are ads that we found in the local city directories. And what's neat about this one, it does show the old Ideal, the shoe shop. Then it shows 3 Holton Street. And then it shows she has offices in New York. So she set up offices in New York, Chicago, eventually St. Louis, and San Francisco. That's by the 1920s. So she's doing pretty good. I guess Alice is doing a good job at home running the factory. So in 1916, they enlarged 3 Holton Street. They added on 1.5 floors. They put in better ventilation, better lighting, and then Herbert Miller is really, he's a mechanic, so he's buying better equipment for them to have. By that time, by the 1920s, a few years later, one newspaper article said they had at least 200 employees working for them at that time, and they're making about 4,000 pairs of shoes a day. So recently, Dave and I were like Googling to see how many babies were born in a certain time period. And what was 1920 was what?
3 million.
3 million. And then we went, 1930 was a little less, right?
No.
During the Depression.
Yeah. Then it went up in the 40s.
Then it went up in the 40s. Then it went up again. So one of the things Adra Miller does, Dave, she wants to make sure her shoes are the best and safest for babies to wear. So she goes to the medical profession and she talks to doctors and nurses, and the doctors and nurses are telling her these old-fashioned shoes have caused many deformed feet for future adults. So they are pleased that she's doing the right and left feet to make these shoes. But they also talk to her about what exactly you would do from the time the baby's an infant to the time it starts walking. So they give her a lot of information on what would be the best type of shoe to have. So they end up with 4 different styles. And in 1928, this is a catalog that the Danvers Archives has, and we were thrilled to find it, because it's a salesman catalog. It showed us all the different types of shoes, how much they're selling. So about a dozen shoes are being sold for about $10. Now that's wholesale. So these are some of the slippers. These are what they call novelties, little fancy. This one's actually kind of cool. That's a bunny rabbit shoe. We have a set. We have a pair over there in the case. So what they ended up doing, you would have crib shoes, which would be very soft and protect the baby while they're in the crib, so they wouldn't, with their kicking and whatever, wouldn't bruise. Then you have the baby is going to start crawling, right? So you want shoes that have very good in protecting the toes as they're crawling around. But you want to make sure, unlike these old shoes, it doesn't have a heel. Because when they're crawling around, the heel will get caught on something. So they don't add, they make it support the baby as the baby starts to crawl around. Then when babies start to stand up and take 1 or 2 steps, then they design the shoe a little different to give it more support in the heel. There will not be a heel on the outside of the shoe. It's actually inside the shoe. It was called a Dutchman, and that was the style they used. So that's the 3rd stage. And then the intermediate stage is when the baby now can run and play and romp. It's called romping and running. And so that would be the intermediate shoe. So those are the 4 styles they developed. They ended up, of course, embellishing them, adding decorations on them. So eventually they had, at one time, 200 different kinds of shoes you could buy. Imagine all the people trying to make these shoes for Ideal. So since she worked with the medical profession, she did one other smart thing. She hired nurses to be her sales representatives. So her nurses went all over the country selling these shoes. And then doctor's office, this is an ad in a medical magazine, pointed to doctors so that they would display her shoes in their office. So the doctor, I think we put a set, I think it's over there, it's back there. And it shows from crib to the next stage, pre-walking, the beginning of walking, and intermediate. So your doctor would have that there when you came in with your baby. Here's the shoe just like they do today, selling the product. So she would sell. So this is at a medical convention in the 1930s, and you have the nurses here. I was trying to blow it up. It was really cool. She's got all sorts of neat stuff. So if any of you have any of this at home, that you got, or you know someone who worked for Ideal, these would be really interesting objects to have in our collection. Who knows where they are today? So their motto became this: starting baby on his, and I added the her, starting, you can tell I'm a feminist, starting baby on his, her 65,000-mile walk. I guess they figured out how many miles you're going to walk in an average lifetime. So that was to prepare you for the walk. And then you start seeing about this time, this is in the late 1920s, that little design of the babies coming out of the shoe. I don't know who designed that, but that would be really interesting to see. And then she hired a nurse called Elizabeth Foster, and she was an orthopedic specialist. So Elizabeth writes a whole book on it. Synopsis of baby shoe research. So again, this is something we have in our collection, and they would take, the salesman would take it around and would show you how they make the shoe, why the shoe is the best for your babies. So the shoe, the Ideal Baby Shoe Company is doing pretty well, and Audrey Day starts to realize too that she should get celebrities to help sell her shoes. Like you do today, right? So even in 1914, she sent a pair to President Wilson for his first grandson. Then in 1923, she sends a pair, a set. We have an example back there. That was sent to Prince George. He was the first grandson of King George V. He would be Queen Elizabeth's cousin. So he's born in 1923. 3 years later is when Queen Elizabeth's born. And she gets a set. And then in the newspaper, when they were sent to Princess Mary for Prince George, in the Danvers Herald, there was a whole article in the newspaper about sending this baby set to the royal family, and that Ideal got a thank you letter. There's a copy of the thank you letter there. So what does Ideal do, or Mrs. Day? She makes duplicates of these sets with copies of the thank you letter. And you're going to buy that for your grandchild, aren't you? So these are hot sellers, right? So then she does it again. Later on, there's Netherlands Queen Juliana, when she has her first baby in the 1930s. She gets a set of Ideal baby shoes. What I would love to do is find out how can you connect with the royal family, and do they still have shoes? And take pictures if you have. So, a very smart marketing tool that she uses. And then years later, she's not in charge of the company in 1948. I'll explain that. But in 1948, baby shoes is sent to the royal family because who's born in 1948? King Charles III. So the company is getting very busy. They're making a lot of shoes, and they need another place. So they buy 20 Locust Street factory. And this picture, I went down that area, was trying to take a photo because the old shoe shop was moved there in the 1920s. So 176, they must have kept the property and they were renting it out, and then they moved the shoe shop there. And this house is still there, and then you have part of the factory. So you have to kind of go where T. Camilla is, and you go kind of off to the other corner. So this is backwards, this photo, when you stand at that place. But this is the old shoe factory, or the shoe shop that was in their backyard and was moved there. And then what Audrey Day did, she set it up as a museum. So a lot of these shoes we have in our exhibit were in that shoe shop, like a museum, to show off what she did. But she also collected 19th century shoes, later shoes, and then also equipment that she would put in the shoe shop. Now, about this time in 1920, there was this great article. It which I can't find the date on because people back then sometimes cut off the date, cut off the article. Don't do that anymore, okay? Now everything's digitized. So, but this article, which I can kind of figure out, it's 1927, told us a lot of information. It gave us the whole operation. It told us all the department. It named several people who worked there. And it told us that Alice Drew had retired and that the new site manager or office manager was a woman named Grace Merrick. Now, Grace Merrick was married to Dr. Frank Merrick, who was the pastor at Maple Street Church. And they moved here in the 1920s. They were both from Syracuse, New York. He had gone to theology school at BU. They both had been graduates of Syracuse University. So they moved here, and Grace ends up taking Alice's job, replacement, when Alice retired. And then it also told us that Emma Little, remember I mentioned her? She is now a department head. So of all the different departments they had, were all headed by women, except for one. That was the guy over the cutting department. But Emma Little is over what's called outside work department. And that was where they hired 75 women working from home, and they did all the fancy work on these shoes. So if you have Ideal shoes that you've seen, some of the case here, that have embroidery work, lace tatting on it, feathers, rabbit fur. Somebody brought in these little shoes that have rabbit fur on them. Those were all sewn at home by one of these 75 women. So you had Emma was over that department, and then you had about 5 or 6 women working in the office, and 2 of them are nieces of Adra Day. It's Herbert's 2 daughters are working for her. And then Grace's daughter, Frances, is also working there. So there's another Frances Merritt working there. So it's great because we got to see a lot of names of individuals who worked for the company at the time. And that it actually told us that Alice Drew has retired. So here's the next interesting thing. What is this company? Ever heard of it? So a few years ago, someone donated us this Lita Baby Shoe Company. And this box here, all the boxes for Ideal were made by the Friend Box Company here in Danvers. This was made by Friend Box Company. It looks just like Ideal Baby Shoe Box. So, and it has a little booklet, just like Ideal Baby Shoe does. So we started to research that. I think Tina found some information on it. And I looked in the town directories and found this listing. Lita Baby Shoe Company, Ruth Smith, Emma Little, treasurer. Those are the first 2 women. Emma Little, she now owns a company. Also, Alice Drew works for the company. She becomes the treasurer. So 3 women. Ruth Smith, we did find out, was from Alexandria, Virginia, moved up here probably in the 1920s, and worked at Ideal, along with Emma Little and Alice Drew. So these 3 women start their own company and was at 29 Maple Street. Becomes very successful, but in 1938, Ruth Smith dies, and Emma and Alice sell it to 2 guys from the Lynn Shoe Company. It continues to operate until the 1960s. It's bought by, guess who? Ideal. So I'm curious to know that Adra Day, excuse me, did she help these women set up a competing company? Are they making different kinds of shoes? The pair we have are felt, but then when I researched Lita Baby Shoe Company online and eBay, shoes came up, they were very similar to the Ideal Baby Shoe Company. So it's just interesting that you would have these 2 baby shoe companies in the same town. And these show some more ads, again, of the Ideal Baby shoes that were being made in the 1930s and 40s. Now, in the 1930s, this is an old photograph. Here's the Ideal Baby Shoe Company with Town Hall and the trolley going by. In the 1930s, the Danvers Herald listed in 1935 the names of companies that were keeping people employed during the Depression. So it was the Herbert Miller Shoe Company, the Ideal Baby Shoe Company over here, the Standard Crayon Company, and this is weird, there's a Bo Ideal Chicken Company. So now are they still in Ideal? I don't know. Or does she invest in it? Who knows? She and Arthur might have invested in it. Arthur Day passes away. He dies in 1933. And their company, the Herbert Miller Company, continues on. And we do find that they're doing so well that Adra Day, either for pleasure or business, is traveling to Puerto Rico, Hawaii. We know from Crew List, a ship's list, where she's traveling. And Alice, I found out, Alice Drew took a trip to Bermuda for a little vacation in the 1920s. So they're doing pretty well. So in the 1930s, they are employing, as close as I could figure from different news articles, about 300 people. Now that's just in the factories. That doesn't count all the people working nationwide as salespeople for the company as well. But they're doing pretty good because in this same article they mentioned that they've enlarged the offices in New York City. So the company's doing pretty good. So you see the ads going into the 1940s. And then this was an ad. Recently someone just gave us the Holton High School magazines it was from 1938, 39, and 40. And I looked in this one and there's the Ideal Baby Shoe Company. So in 1945, Adra Day retires. And this was a big article in the Danvers Herald about 39 years of progress. And she sells the company to a Grace McCutcheon. And Grace McCutcheon was a saleswoman. She sold infant wear. So they probably met each other, knew each other from going to all these conferences and conventions. And so she sells it actually to Grace and Grace's husband, Paris McCutcheon. But Paris dies 2 years later. So Grace is running the company. So this was in the Danvers archives, and I thought it was really neat because there's Grace when she's young. When she was born, 1891 in Brooklyn, New York. And that she died in 1967 here in Danvers. And this is Grace with her oldest nephew, James McGinnity. McGinnity? That's how you say it. And this is Grace with her family. That's her mother, Pauline. That's James when he's a young boy. That's James' mother, Gertrude McGinnity. And that's James' younger brother, Robert. So James and Robert run the company with their aunt, Grace. And then when she dies in 1967, they inherit the company. And it's hard to know, the latest I see the company still listed in the city directory is in around 1980. But Adra Miller Day died in 1952, and the portrait we have, that was done by one of her cousins out in Michigan after she had passed away. Now, her estate, she didn't have children, but she has a lot of nieces and nephews. They'll be very happy. Because her estate is worth, in 1952, over $650,000. Now, when I Googled to see what is that worth today, $7.5 million. So that's split among all her nieces and nephews. So she left Danvers after she retired and moved to Swampscott, and that is where she died in 1952, December 1952. But what was great, some of the stories I've given you about her family making fun of her and Herbert getting those business cards came from an interview she did with the Salem Evening News in early 1952. So that was kind of interesting. So I wanted to show you this. This is also in the Danvers archive. So this is showing 1965. By that time, they're making 75 different types of shoes. Maybe they found out doing 200, just too much. Required too many people. So this 1965 Ideal Baby Shoe Catalog, you'll see some of the pages back there on that board back there, but it showed the different styles. So here are crib styles, and we put up some of the examples. And then those royal gift sets were called the heritage sets. And so by the 1960s, they're in a fancy box, and that's what we have in the back. So those would be called the royal set that you would buy for those grandbabies. And they have that royal shoe, just like Queen Elizabeth and King Charles III. So those became very popular at the time. And then in this was a 1965 ad that Tina found. But what I like is because it's Corpus Christi, Texas. And Mrs. Douglas from Ideal Baby Shoe Company is coming to a department store and telling you why you want to buy her shoes, these shoes. So these were what those nurses and other saleswomen would go around the country to help promote the shoes at different times. So I don't know what happened once the McGinney brothers, they passed away in the 1990s, but the last time I see the company listed is 1980. So I don't know, I'm not from Danvers, we didn't move here until 1988, but I remember the old factory there. But I don't know if it just sat there, no one would buy the property, and then of course the town, I guess maybe the town bought the property, I'm not sure, some of you might know, and then they tore it down. You can see there's still a chimney there for the parking lot they have today. So it's an amazing legacy that one woman started here in 1902 and that became so successful that it employed so many people. And 90% of the employees were women. And some of the articles I read said that some of the women stayed there for decades. And the only thing I found where maybe employees weren't happy, there was in 1925 a strike. And it was the cutter strike. The cutters in the factory were demanding high wages. But the newspaper article actually said they were already getting paid more than any other shoe cutters anywhere else in Massachusetts. But I couldn't find an article later to tell me, you know, did they win or did they get higher wages, what happened. What's really great now is Danvers Archive, they digitized the Danvers newspaper. So starting with the Danvers Mirror from 1880 to 1920, and then Danvers Herald is digitized from 1920 to, I think, through the 1960s. And that's where, once they did that, that was a gold mine for us. We found all these great articles as well. So, I'll end there. If anybody has any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Maple Street Church a few years ago did a history between Maple Street and the first church. And in fact, the people from the first church broke off because the hierarchy were the ones that they made their money selling the shoes to the slaves.
Yes.
And the people that founded Maple Street were so upset over the fact that the higher-ups of the church who were judging them were in fact making thousands, millions, whatever,
Right.
off the selling shoes to slaves.
Right.
And so they broke off from First Church and founded Maple Street.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wondered how many, Nancy Putnam was working for the Preston brothers, but it did list the Putnams are making the shoes and selling them. So pretty much like the globe onion is being shipped all over, that's what they're growing from their farm, and then they're sending these shoes to the southern plantations. So I found it interesting. I grew up in the South, and when I first moved here, how many people would say, New England has nothing to do with slavery. And I worked for the National Park Service for 30 years, and down on, no, that's not exactly. Yes, Dave.
Just a little bit of history on the final days of the factory.
Okay.
I was selected at the time And the building was owned by a gentleman whose name I cannot remember, but he was renting out office space in it, but not doing very well. The building was getting very dilapidated. The town did need parking space, so the town decided they wanted to buy the building, raise it, and build a parking lot. So it went before town meeting, and the interesting fact is that the moderator at that time was Peter Zook, who lived right next door to it, and felt it'd be a conflict of interest, or looked like a conflict of interest if he moderated, and I became moderator pro tem for that one article. And town meeting did vote for it. And that was torn down, and the town did build a parking lot there.
Because I don't know when they.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I was chairman of the Board of Selectmen when that occurred. And we were the very gracious recipient of a very generous state grant that allowed us to purchase the building, which has gone into terrible disrepair. It was a horrific fire hazard. And we were able to raise the building and build the parking, the park and the parking lot, really with the vote of the town meeting to purchase the property, but also the recipient of a very generous state grant.
So I don't know, like I would need to do the Ds, like what Dave McKenna has told me where I can go to do that. I don't know. I assume I'd be on own.
No,
They
had sold it to
They
somebody.
had sold it.
They sold it, right, I mean, but in the early years, I think they owned the property.
Probably,
They had
yes.
to.
I would assume so.
Yeah, and then I don't know if they own 20 Locust Street or they just rented it, I'm not sure.
Did they stay living in that house that you showed us? I mean, as she became wealthier, did they stay?
Well, they lived at 176 Locust Street. That was the first home. And then they moved to 18 Holton Street. And they lived at 18 Holton Street, and then Arthur dies in 1933. They stayed living there. In fact, her oldest nephew, who came to live with her, Jervis, who works for the company, he and his wife lived there at 18 Holton Street when Mrs. Day moves to Swansea. Anybody else? Yes.
One other thing quickly I noticed in your talk, that they moved from Worthington, I don't know if that was Massillon or New Hampshire.
Massachusetts.
When they lost the farm. It's interesting that up on Locust Street, there's a street called Worthington Ave, and down the end of it is a Day Ave off of it. So apparently named from members of the family or that they owned it.
Right, because the 176 is right on the corner
Yeah.
of Worthington and Locust. Yes, yes, Peter.
Yeah, Sheila, at Daniel Lowe and Company, I was the head stock boy. This is the late 60s, early 70s. And one of my jobs was to box the shoes that said to be bronze. And 99% of them were ideal baby shoes, but I always remembered that. And they would come back mounted on the platform, and they'd have a picture. They're really beautiful. But how important that shoe was to the mother, and they continued on. This was into the 70s that the people would have this done, and it would be a cherished family object on the mantle. So it had a life beyond just the baby shoe.
Well, it's extraordinary because, I mean, she was smart enough to find out, well, what are the best shoes for babies?
Yeah.
Because nobody was researching that, and then she works with the medical. Of course, then she gets them, the doctors, to have it in their offices to sell her shoes, so. Yes, yes, because this Ideal Baby Shoe Company is pretty much it for baby shoes until maybe by the 1930s, maybe other shoe companies are starting to duplicate it or copying the shoes. And then, like, I emailed my family members back in Memphis and I said, what shoes were we wearing? And my older brother goes, we were wearing Buster Brown's. And he had a better memory. He goes, Mom took us to this shoe store and we had to put our feet in an X-ray machine. He said, being a boy, he goes, I thought that was the coolest thing. I probably put my feet in there and several times and no telling what would have happened.
I have a few pair of bronze shoes from the 40s, and I wonder, is there any discernible way to tell if that's a Mrs. Fisher?
The only thing is they did put a label inside the shoe. It's kind of hard, yeah. Not all the shoes did. I mean, luckily for us, a lot of them came with the boxes. Someone donates them. But sometimes the label is inside. Sometimes you're lucky enough, you might have seen one of the cases over there. It has that symbol I showed you, the little labels with the baby sitting in the shoe. So sometimes that's, yeah. The other celebrity I didn't mention was the Dion Kentuckers. So they were born in 1934, and these are crib shoes. So these were all made, this is of course a set you could buy for yourself. And so they were sent to the Kentuckers when they were born in 34. It's kind of sad reading about their life. Yes?
Another nice, something that's interesting is the Ideal Baby Steps, the daycare center that is now over on Winter
right.
Street. So it goes around.
Yeah. Yes.
Sheila, wonderful talk, just fascinating. Walked by that factory my whole life with just not much thought. So this woman she had offices in New York. She was based, her operation was here in Danvers. You mentioned here the Friend Box Company, they were very close. Were you able to tell anything more about her business relationships? There was a Danvers Businessmen's Association, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Were they,
who knows? The sad thing is there's no business records. I don't know where they would be at. Training at the Phillips Library, who knows, or any family. I know I'm saying their right name on it, but yes.
I wanted to add that she did belong to Zonta, which
Yes.
was the women's version of the Lions Club of Women.
Yeah.
So she was honored in Texas, at the same meeting that Amelia Earhart was honored.
So I had that, Tina found that out, and I went, who are the Zontas? And we're like, I don't know.
It's a little word.
So, yeah, so we looked it up, and then we found out that it was an organization started by 5 women in Brooklyn, New York, and they had gone to a Kiwanis holiday party, and were mad that the Kiwanis weren't letting them in because they were all businessmen, men, not men.
wow.
So they started the Zonta Club. I don't know what Zonta is.
Wow.
Who knows? So they started, and then this spread throughout the country and internationally too. When I looked up their website, it still exists. So Tina had found out that, this Texas club gave her an award, and we were like, what? What is that? And that William Gilbert was like, God, so they're honoring Mrs. Day, the same club meeting. So you never know what else you're going to discover. Like now I know what Knights of the Grip are. And I even well, why was it called Knights of the Grip? But then also it was based on knights ripping their swords. Crusades. So that's where it came. Fraternal organization. Yes. Yes. Do you have a question?
We have 3 sets of baby shoes from the 60s. I have no idea if they're ideal baby shoes because we have them bronze. they're shiny and they're on a pedestal. And there's a picture of the baby between the 2 shoes. Do you have any idea?
So what's kind of cool now is that those 2 catalogs, the 1928, 1965 catalog, that they have pictures of what they were selling. So if anyone wants to volunteer and help us try to match some of these shoes to what you see in the catalog, especially the shoes where we don't have the boxes, we don't know. What style it is or when it was made. So there's not any information in this shoe telling us, this was style number 22 or something. But be sure to look, because, I mean, Joyce and I, neither of us are mothers. We're not grandmothers. But you should have seen us oohing and eyeing. Especially when we found the gold ones. Oh, the painted flowers. Oh my gosh. The thing I did here, this was just a map to show you. These are maps from 1890s.
97.
97. And I put it out here because here's Putnamville. And then the farm, the Doherty farm would be right about here. That's 176 Locust Street. So we were able to find that. But it's kind of a neat old map. These were given to us, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So they're showing, there's different neighborhoods. So we have Tappanville, it's a whole big separate map. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Is Susan here from Ideal Baby Steps? No? That should be others.
All right, well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for spending time with the Danvers Historical Society. Please be sure to visit our website to donate at www.danvershistory.org. Have a nice day.